Welcome to Living Out Loud with your host, Jess Phillips, where we talk all things addictions, codependency, relationships, and the good, bad, and ugly in between. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 5 of Living Out Loud with your host, Jess Phillips. And with Jess Phillips alone, no guest again this week. Going to do another solo one before I start taking your questions and topics from the audience. So next week, we're going to pitch asking for a friend. So get ready to send in any type of anonymous question. Email me, DM me on Instagram, message me on Facebook, and let's get those questions out there because I'm excited to talk about all the things that you guys want to talk about. I was just on the phone with my dad. He's in Florida and he's like, oh, so what are you going to talk about this week? And I was like, I'm going to talk about you and how you screwed me up in life. And he was like, that's okay. I totally accept that. My poor dad. And I think that's really what I do want to focus on today is when we grow up with a set of parents, I never realized my parents were just people. I always thought that they were just parents. I thought my mom was born to be a mother and my dad was born to be a father. And now as I get older, I'm realizing like, no. They were probably just kids at one point that decided to have kids and do the best they can. And my parents are great people, still wonderful people. But the more I learn about relationships and the more I work with people who are struggling in their personal relationships, what I've seen people who struggle with addictions, how they struggle in relationships, I really had to start to ask myself, why? What's going on? Why are some people showing up one way in romantic relationships while other people just seem to be secure and they flow and everything just seems to, work out a little easier for them? And I don't know about you guys, but that's not been the case for me at all, And looking back now, I can start to put the pieces together, especially from watching my parents' relationship. I mean, I think that that's the first modeled relationship that we see and that we're watching all day long. And as I got older and other couples started to mirror healthy relationships to me, I was like, oh, that was not what was happening at home. And, this isn't a podcast to say things were terrible at home and, there was violence. There was none of that. It was a wonderful home. My parents are wonderful people. I'm sure 70% of the listeners right now know either my mom or my dad and know that they're great people, but any two people are going to have their own struggles in relationships. And the older I get now, I start to realize when people have totally different attachment styles and totally different temperaments, you're going to run into issues. And, thank God we live in a time where, therapy is promoted, couples counseling is promoted, because there's stuff, man, there's stuff that happens over the years, especially decades that go by. And if it's left, untalked about and untreated and uncovered or, just not brought to the surface, I think that's really where so much resentment can be built from. And, I never really paid much attention to relationships when I was drinking and using, because I think when you're in the bar scene and you're bartending and you're partying, it's kind of the last thing that was on my mind. It was just like, where are we going? Where are we getting drunk? Where are we getting drugs from? And let's do this. And then when I got sober, it was like, oh, wow, here's a whole area that you haven't had any practice in. You don't know half the time what you're feeling, what's okay to say, what's not okay to say. It was almost, and I was told that in early sobriety, it's going to almost be like an arrested development. You're going to feel like you did maybe even before you started drinking or using. So say I started partying at 13 and I got sober at 21. Well, emotionally, And probably intellectually, I was closer to being a 13-year-old because it was almost like a blackout period of my life where you're not working on your feelings and expressing yourself. There's none of that. It was just like, okay, you're sober now. Let's get back into the real world. And relationships were a tough one for me, even platonic relationships at the beginning. I'm not just talking about intimate or romantic relationships, even platonic relationships were very tough. Just being with another person and learning how to communicate can be very difficult when you haven't done that. And lately I've been working with so many people. I've been working with so many incredible people that when I'm listening to them, I just and I guess I could say the same for myself. I just look at them and I'm like, man, I wish you could see what I see. Some of the highest achievers, so productive, beautiful people inside and out. And it's almost like the ones that set the biggest goals are often the most insecure ones. And that was really the case for me. You know, you pile on a whole ton of insecurity on top of any type of addiction, drug addiction, alcoholism. It's messy when you get sober because there's a lot to clear up there, and I think it was about grade 9, and I talked about this in the podcast a couple of weeks ago. It was around grade 9 where was really my first introduction to insecurity. And I firmly believe that people have these markers in their lives, especially around adolescence, prepubescent area timeline, anywhere from 10 to 13, 10 to 14. It's like these markers happen. And for me, it's interesting because these things have stayed ingrained in my mind. I remember being in grade 7 and 8 at that all girls private academy. And I don't remember experiencing that much insecurity there. I mean, it was all girls. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was more or less trying to be myself. I was for sure super nervous and anxious. But as soon as I got to that public school, it was co-ed. There was a whole array of different types of students and personalities and people I was trying to put on a show for. And it was really hard. I remember that. I remember there was a kid. I hope he listens to this one day because we're still friends today. And he teased me so badly when I got to that public school in grade 9. I remember the first day I met him. I don't even think he had gone through puberty yet. And he was so short and so skinny. He just looked like this scrawny little twig. And I had just gotten my braces off. I was probably already almost 5'8", as tall as I am now. And he kind of looked up at me and he's like, "You're in grade 9?" He's like, "You don't look like you're in grade 9." And it's so funny, these tiny little words or sentences that just stay lodged in my brain. And from then on out, he was just on a mission to tease me. It was him and this other kid. And I would start off first period. My first period, I think it was art. It was awful. I did not want to be there at all. And they would sit across from me and they would call me bad, bad, bad names. I don't even think I've ever publicly talked about this before. It didn't last long, so I never really coined it as bullying, but they were always commenting on how much taller I was, that I didn't look like the rest of the girls, that I looked more like a boy. It was brutal. And I remember just kind of stuffing it. I would never talk to anybody else about it. I definitely did not talk to my parents about it. My mom, God bless her, I love her to death, but she is not a communicator. We were talking about this the other day, actually. It's like she is number one at like outfits. The house looks perfect. The outfit is perfect. My lunch is perfectly packed. I'm picked up, dropped off, but emotions, feelings, there was none of that at all. And so when I was called these things and teased, I kind of just, I don't know where I put it. And I thought maybe it would just eventually go away, but I just kind of acted as if with my friends and went about my day. And I remember, I think it was about 6 years ago. No, maybe about 4 years ago. I was in Toronto and I got a late night message on Instagram from this kid. And we've stayed connected on Facebook and on Instagram this whole time. And he's doing really well in life. And he sent me this really nice message. And he was like, Jess, like, I'm so proud of you. I'm kind of watching your journey in Toronto and these different companies. Super sweet message. We had a great conversation. And I was asking him about his family and his kids and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know how we got on the topic, but we started to talk about grade 9, and I said some of the things that he said to me, and he goes, man, did I have a crush on you? I was like, what? Wait a minute, what? Like, that was your way of showing that you had a crush on me? And for sure, like, I never held anything against him. I didn't care about that, but for me personally, I remember that comment. It's almost like wearing a pair of glasses where the comment was just written across the lens. And going forward, I have notoriously obsessed about my height, my size, being bigger built, whatever that means, not being like a regular skinny grade 9 girl. And man, has that followed me all the way up until, I'm not going to lie, it still happens today. I mean, it's definitely much better, but it's just so interesting how we bring things with us. And the more that I speak with people, especially about relationships, especially about codependence, when we show up in relationships with a big backpack of insecurity, it can be very difficult to navigate. Very difficult. And I don't think I understood how difficult it was, because when I did start to get into relationships when I was sober, first of all, I was so young. I was 23. I didn't really know like what was going on at the time. But it's so interesting how many different kind of defense mechanisms, walls, projections, all of these things can come up when we don't feel safe enough to say what's actually going on. And I remember getting into my first relationship in sobriety. Oh boy, what a nightmare. What a nightmare. Because I still wasn't okay with myself. I was just pretending. It was like I was just going to act as if, and I'll just pretend I know what I'm doing, and I'll just go along with whatever the other person wants to do, and everything will eventually be okay. And it doesn't work that way. It really doesn't work that way. When we don't feel safe enough with another person to talk about some of those darker shadows, I mean, I'll speak for myself, but I don't know how far that relationship can go. And I was so scared. I've always been so scared to tell someone, platonic, work relationship, intimate relationship, to just tell people like the truth. And now here I am starting a podcast, just telling people the truth, because it's easier. It's easier, and everybody has their own shit. Like, I thought, I'm extremely self-centered, so maybe I thought I was the only one who was insecure or who felt, chubby in high school, or who, and the older I get, I'm like, oh my God, no, everybody has their stuff. And I think if we just openly talked about it a little bit more, I think it would be less painful for everybody. Because the stuff that I kept inside, my God, now that I'm talking about it and now that I can help and coach other people through it, it feels so much lighter, and it feels so much better, and it's so not scary anymore, because, my problems might look different than other people's problems, but it's the same feeling inside. I remember having a therapist tell me in treatment, he goes, if everybody were to throw their problems in a big pile, if we were all sit in a circle, he goes, I guarantee you would take your problem back. And I didn't understand like the depth of that message at the time. And now I do, now I do, because I always think my problems are the worst, and they're really not. They're really, really, really not. So I was getting into these relationships and without doing the inner work on myself. And that's a big line in the recovery community. The inside work, do the inside work. It's a process from going to the inside out. And I was like, what is that mumbo jumbo? Because I'm the type of person where it's like, if you fix everything on the outside, you're going to be gold. You're going to be good. Fix the outfit, fix the hair, fix the makeup, get a nice place, get a nice car, get a degree, and you're going to be good. It's a lie. It's a lie, because then you get all these things and then there you are. And if grade 9-year-old me is showing up with a degree and a car and a relationship, it's the same shit. I just have a bunch of material stuff on the outside, but nothing has really changed on the inside. And that's a painful lesson. That's a really, really, really painful lesson. And whether you're learning it at 25 or 35 or 45 or 55 or 65, it doesn't matter. It's a painful lesson. But I knew that I had to start moving through it. I could no longer move around it, move over it, move under it. And that's what my mind will always try to tell me to do. Solve this problem somehow with the least amount of pain. I don't think anybody wants to be in emotional pain, but my mind will instantly just tell me, like, okay, maybe, leave this person. It's the person's fault. Leave this person. The next person will be better. Move cities. That will be better. Change condos. The new condo will be better. Change something on the outside. And it used to convince me that I really would feel different on the inside. And maybe I would for like 3 weeks, because new shiny things are exciting, right? No one can tell me that that's not exciting. Those are very exciting. A new car is exciting. A new condo is exciting. A new city is exciting. And then the hype wears off. And then it's like, how is Jess showing up in this new city? And historically, I was just bringing myself with me wherever I went, with all of those unhealed wounds, and I become the projector, right? I am, that premise of your environment is a reflection of your internal condition. And my environment was always chaotic. I was always mad at somebody or irritated. It was always somebody else's fault, especially in a relationship. Oh my God. I don't even know where to start. It could have been this. They're not clean enough. They breathe weird. This is just, I was incapable of looking inward and starting to see why am I so restless inside? Why am I showing up this way? And I think when I did start to ask those deep, juicy questions, I got a better sense of myself. And I think one of the questions that I get most often from clients that I work with is, do I need to be single to do this work? And I always tell them the same answer. No, you don't. Is it easier? Yes. I believe it's hard to do that big, heavy duty inner work when you're constantly faced with somebody next to you, because stuff is going to come up. Now, are you going to end that relationship just because you want to do inner work? Probably not. Do I suggest that? Probably not. Is it easier to do single? In my experience, definitely. And I think it does have to come to a point where you have to start to look at your own demons before you get into these relationships. Because the more that we just keep those silent and we just keep those stuffed in, doesn't matter who's in front of you, they're always going to come out. I think Toronto was the biggest lesson for me, because I think that was it was almost like the final thing on my checklist, where I knew that I was going to take everything that I acquired, go to this new city, and almost like be this new person. And I really, 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 really convinced myself that that was going to be the case. And I got there, and it was the same Jess that came there. I was terrified. I was the new girl. I didn't have any friends. After 3 weeks of exploring the city, it's like, okay, what are you going to do now? And I remember getting my first job there. I was working in transitional housing. It was a government job. and a 9 to 5, and you're working with other people. And I really just started to see how I was showing up in those relationships, you know, how I needed everybody to think that I was like the go-getter, the overachiever, was going to do the best job. And again, it was almost like I wasn't allowing myself to be human, like a human person who's flawed and who's going to make mistakes. Because the moment somebody like me would make a mistake, it would be the end of the world. Because I set such high expectations of myself, the smallest thing that goes wrong, it would take me out. It would send me into such a spiral, and I would feel so bad. And I never understood that it is such a self-centered, egotistical cycle. You know, I used to think that if you're feeling sorry for yourself or any type of self-pity couldn't be egotistical, because in my mind, the ego shows up as cockiness or overconfidence or arrogance, but it's not. Me feeling sorry for myself is just as self-centered. So I would set these huge bars for myself. And when I couldn't make it, and I started to meet people there and they were like, Jess, you know, I would get the same comments. And I think that that's a big sign, is when you're getting the same comments from people, I think it's time to start to look at some of those issues. And I've always been told the same thing, like, can you just be a little bit softer on yourself? And one of the saddest realizations that I had was that if I'm not able to be soft and gentle on myself, there's no way I'm going to be soft and gentle on other people. And I never realized how tough I was on other people, you know? And my dad was always tough. My dad always motivated me, but my dad was always tough on me. And there was always this lingering feeling of maybe I didn't do enough, or maybe I could have done better, because I would celebrate something with him, or I would tell him, you know, oh, I did this, I got this grade. And he'd be like, okay, what's next? What's next? It was never like I could just enjoy what just happened. It was like, okay, now what? Push harder. And it took me 35 years to realize he pushes too hard on himself. This is not about me. This is a very large projection of how hard he is on himself. Therefore, he's going to be hard on other people. My mom, on the other hand, very gentle on herself, very patient, very loving. So when we talk, I don't get that harshness from her. Now, is a little bit of harshness or a little bit of motivation helpful sometimes? Yeah, for sure. But I think it's so important today, and it's something that I am so mindful of, is to celebrate people's small victories, however small, because this whole game is not about acquiring these huge things or these big goals, you know, like even this podcast this week, I was like, holy shit, where are you going to find the time to do this podcast? You promised your audience you were going to do a podcast a week. Now it's Friday. Now you're late, and the whole cycle starts spinning. And I was like, can you just put some makeup on, sit down, put a shirt on, and record your podcast? It doesn't have to be perfect. You have to be honest. That was the whole point of this. It's like I can take something that was supposed to be so fun and creative and suck the fun out of it. And why? Why? It's just supposed to be an honest platform for people to connect. That was the whole part of it, you know, and I have to constantly remind myself of those things. But it's just very interesting now to start to reflect on, you know, where that level of programming comes from. And it's not a blame game. You know, I love my dad for who he is today. And I can sit here and say that because I sit here from a place of love for myself. There's no longer like, of course, there's insecurities and things that come up, but there's no longer these huge holes in the wall that need to be patched. I know who I am. I feel confident in who I am. And the more loving I am towards myself, and I practice that, when I see my dad, I can show up as that too. Because let's be honest, he's 72. He's not changing. I talk about all this emotional mumbo jumbo crap to him, and his head spins. He's like, oh, I'm happy for you, honey. Please. He just wants me to go away. It's too much. It's too much. He didn't grow up like that. You know, but what I do stay focused on is what he did teach me. Yes, there was some stuff. Yes, there was some bad habits and behaviors and things that were modeled that I took on, but as a responsibility to work through my own stuff and healing, I can now be grateful for the things that he did teach me, like he's funny, my dad. He's fucking funny. I used to laugh as a kid and I got that from him. I love to make people laugh. I love to laugh. I find everything funny. I find things that shouldn't be funny, funny. Like somebody will trip near me and I just burst out laughing. I don't mean to. Like I really care that they hurt themselves, but I'm just dying laughing. I just think things are so comical. And I got that from my dad, the gift of gab. I got that from my dad. My dad would wing everything. I'm like, Dad, aren't you nervous for this speech? What are you going to talk about? He's like, I don't know. I'll figure it out when I get there. And I'm exactly the same. I always tell people, especially like, I think week 1 to week 4 of when I'm coaching people out of a 10-week session is usually the most painful. Maybe week 1 starts off very motivating and it's exciting to what's going to come. But when you start to really jump in and do the work and really examine the things that you do and take a cold, hard look at how you show up in relationships, that's painful, especially if you're struggling. I mean, for people who aren't struggling, it's not painful. Keep doing what you're doing because you're not struggling. But for people who are in emotional pain and you're brave enough to take a look at that, I didn't want to take a look at the fact that I was taking temper tantrums in relationships. Like when I wouldn't get what I want, it was an adult temper tantrum. I can't do that. I can't do that and have a successful relationship at the same time. Do I fall into that trap? Sure. Do I clean it up a lot quicker than I used to? For sure. But I mean, those old behaviors were just, they can't come with you, One that I just mentioned that was classic of my dad was really that stonewalling. I think I have a very hard time when I see people doing that to each other. Really, that kind of, it's like this power play where it's this ultimate shutdown and I'm going to punish you with my silence or my coldness. And it's brutal. It's really, really brutal. I understand why you're doing it. I understand why I did it and why I can probably still do it today, but it's really brutal. It's really the opposite of connection and the opposite of communication. It's a power move, and I don't know how necessary power moves are in relationships. I remember my best friend. I think I'm going to talk about my best friend in every single one of my solo podcasts because I love her so much. And I know that she listens. And I never realized how grateful I was to have a very best friends. Like we were in diapers together. We've known each other. We've been in each other's lives for 36 years, maybe with like a little break when she moved away. But like to have that constant unconditional support, and emotionally and temperamentally, we are so different. We are so different. I'm operating at 175 miles an hour and she's cruising. She's cruising at a comfortable 50. She's stable. She's calm. She loves to read. She loves to relax. And I'm like, where are we going? What are we doing? What's happening? What goal am I going to set? What degree am I going to get? So when I'm in a frenzy, I call her and she just remains so neutral. Like she doesn't jump into that emotion with me. And she gives me this outsider's perspective that I just find I'm just so grateful for it. I'm very, very, very lucky to have that, and I remember in the past, she would mention, she goes, why does it always seem like there's a power struggle in your relationships? And I was a little bit offended at first because I'm always offended when somebody tells me the truth. I think that's how you know it's the truth. If you're offended, if your feathers are ruffled, there's something there that you need to look at. And she said that. And I was like, fuck, you're right. You're right. You're right. I feel comfortable holding the power sometimes because my ego tells me you're winning. You've got this. The ball is in your court. But that's not sustainable. That can't last. That's just a construct that I've made in my mind to make myself feel better. And if we're really getting down to like unconditional love and unconditional positive regard for someone, there's no room for power plays in there. And I'm so grateful for these little tidbits that I get from people because they really help me take a look at myself. And I think it has to be this idea of like, being ready to not show up like that anymore. I don't want other people to be in emotional pain, so I don't want to contribute to that in any way. And I think Toronto was the most humbling experience I've ever had because it was the biggest idea I've ever had in sobriety that really made me understand. It made me realize like the world is a tough place, especially in a big city like that. I think growing up in Montreal, especially in the West Island, it's like a little bubble. My parents were right there. My school was right there. My work was right there. It takes you 10, 15 minutes to get anywhere. And then all of a sudden I'm downtown Toronto and it's like, holy shit, no one gives a shit about you here. People are in a rush, get out of the way, and I'm so grateful that I have the opportunity to connect with recovery communities wherever I go, because I don't know if I didn't have that, I'm not sure how long I would have lasted. I remember becoming friends. So I'll call her friends. She was more like a mentor with this woman, Danielle, who I'm also very grateful is still in my life today. And she was, I think, to date, my most spiritual friend. Like she had a calmness about her, even the way that she spoke. Like her voice was soft, her temperament was soft. And she would meet me for coffee every single week when I first moved to Toronto. And I remember when she was giving me suggestions or encouragement, she would just say things in a way that made me realize, like, Jess, you don't need to bulldoze your way through life. Like these small connections that you have with people are the meat and potatoes. This is how you're going to become a better person. This is how you're going to learn how to show up in friendships, to show up as a family member, to show up, one day in a romantic relationship. And I remember I would talk to her about all my problems and I'd be spinning and spinning out of control. And she'd never once raise her voice, get sucked into that emotional turmoil that I was bringing to the coffee shop. And she would just so quietly and humbly say, like, Jess, you can't continue like this. Like something's got to change. You have to start taking a look at something on the inside because your outside is insane, right? You can't be buzzing around like this all day long. And she really taught me she taught me the gift of consistency, I think, at the beginning. The fact that she was willing to show up and to meet me every single week. And we developed a friendship. We developed this relationship that was it was trusting. It was honest. She was always very honest with me. I was able to be honest with her. And we still talk today. She's still in Toronto, but we still laugh and check in. And I think these relationships that maybe I didn't give as much importance to, I realize today are the building blocks to any other relationship that I want to have. Because I can't show up one way with my friends and one way with my family and one way with a partner. I was told very early on, try and be the same person wherever you go. And if I know one thing about alcoholics and addicts is that they are master chameleons, masters. They'll be whoever you want them to be. They'll go on a date and the person will be like, oh, I love painting. They'll be like, I love painting too. Never painted a day in their life. I love bowling. Yeah, I love bowling. I was also the queen of that. Yeah, for sure. I was the yes girl. Yep, no problem. Let's do it. Yep, sure. Okay. And every time I say yes, when I really mean no, there is a resentment brewing. I could be the perfect partner for like the first 6 weeks of the relationship. I'm the best. Yeah, sure. Let's do this. Oh yeah, I love this show. Oh yeah, no problem. And then 6 weeks in, I'm like, I don't want to do that. Why did I say that? And why did I say that? Because I want you to like me. How many times I've done that in a relationship? I'll be whoever you want me to be so that you like me better. And who gets left behind in that process? Me. Every time. Every time. It was almost like selling my soul. I'll sell my soul to you, make sure you're happy, even with jobs. Like I would take these jobs, and that friend that I was just talking about, Danielle, she would call them survivor jobs. I would take these jobs just to, I don't know, bring in a paycheck. I would read the job description and I'd be like, okay, I'll figure it out. I'll do it. And then 6 weeks in, I'm like, I don't even like this job. And that really speaks to the lack of sense of self that I used to have, especially in my 20s. 20s were difficult. They were the most formative, and they laid the strongest foundation for me in my recovery for the person I am today. But it was fucking hard. It was hard to be a sober nutcase in my 20s. And just like not taking anybody's advice either. I think that's one thing you just don't do in your 20s. My ego was like, couldn't even fit in the room that I'm in right now in my 20s. I thought I knew everything. I thought all of my ideas were so smart. And I would take these jobs and I'm just like, oh my God. And then you have to go every day. And then instead of saying, like a normal, honest person, maybe this job isn't for me, let me save this company time, I would start to just behave badly instead. Critique other people's performance, pick fights, gossip, you name it. Because when I can't be honest with myself, that's coming out sideways somehow. Anytime I'm not speaking my truth, oh man, do I get very, very, very crafty and creative to make it look like you have the problem when it's really myself. It was always this self-abandonment because A, I was too scared to say what I really wanted. And B, I thought I would be judged for it. And when I finally started to do it, it was the opposite. When I finally started to just be me, everything was just so much smoother. It was like, okay, all you have to do is just listen to that inner voice this whole time. And I've read it before, I've heard it before, I've watched movies on it before, but when it came down to me, it was just way more confusing. So spending a couple of years working with that friend and meeting her and really just feeling the struggle of living in that city. When I came back to Montreal, I think it was this newfound appreciation for my hometown, that old saying, like you just like, there's no place like home. For me, I just couldn't replace the calmness and the sense of security that I feel in Montreal. Does that mean I'm going to stay here for the rest of my life? No, but it's definitely made me more appreciative of, how I grew up, and there's a closeness to this city. I feel anyways, there's just there's a lot, it's a more intimate city than Toronto. That's for sure. And I remember coming back and going over to my parents' house and just like, and this is probably just like an annoying classic podcast of just like, oh, Jess, you're starting to get older and you're starting to learn all of these lessons, but like my parents are not going to be around forever. And now I see my dad at 72 and I'm like, oh man, you're getting old. Like you're getting old. And now I have to ask myself, like, okay, how do you want to show up in this relationship? Do you want to be in conflict? Do you want to be picking him apart for all of the things he didn't do for you? Do you want to be fighting with him? Do you want to call him a narcissist? I don't want to do any of those things. I don't know how long he's going to be around, And I remember one classic trap that I would fall into is starting to talk about their relationship. And if there's one piece of advice that you get from this podcast is stay out of your parents' relationship, especially if it was fucked up, because you're not going to win. You're not going to win. They're old. They're set in their ways. Stay out of it, And I don't think that they ever really want to talk to their kid about it. But I started to get very lippy, especially the more I learned and the more I studied. And I was like, oh, this is exactly what you guys are doing. This is what you need. This is the type of therapy that you need. This is how you need to communicate. And they're just looking at me like, I never asked your opinion. and B, just stay out of that one. And for me now, I really just, I take I take the good from them. I realize the bad. I realize the coping strategies and the defense mechanisms that I have learned from that relationship. And I work on it myself. I work on it with support. You work on it with a therapist. You work on it with a coach. You work on it with a recovery community. It's very hard to do the healing inside the family network. That's for sure. But I think that newfound sense of appreciation for them and for my friends, like I remember moving to Toronto and just being like, bye. Didn't really talk to many people about it. I was just kind of blinders on. I was going for it. I really wasn't nurturing even my platonic relationships at the time. And I don't know if I just took them for granted or I don't know what it was. I think I was just so busy building this life that I forgot that these are all the things that create my life. And when I moved back here, I was really, really, really focused on showing up as a better friend. That was the first place I started. And I think I talked to a lot of my friends individually, and it was just like this wall was broken down. I never realized how shut off I was showing up. And I think ultimately, the more closed off you are, the less you can get hurt. And I didn't even realize that I was doing that. I didn't realize how difficult it was for me to be vulnerable. Like I'm squirming right now, even talking about vulnerability. It's always been my biggest weakness. I can help others be vulnerable. I can get right to your vulnerability with you and explore that with you and help you flourish in that department. But when it comes to me, it's like, I'll build walls on top of walls on top of walls. And I really just didn't want to do that anymore. And I got to practice that with friends, thank God. And it's just been these amazing building blocks, and the more I show up as a better friend, the better I can show up at work. And the better I show up at work, the better I can show up my family. It's all just this kind of like this web, but it really came down to getting a better sense of self. Because I think living for what you think other people want or acting like how you think other people think you should act, it's exhausting. And I think people can do it for a very long time too. I couldn't do it any longer than I did it for. Something bad was going to happen for sure. I was feeling so unsettled inside and confused and irritable and restless. And until I really took that deep dive and got to know that self-identity, and there's so many different cool things that you can do to get down in there. I'm a big fan of lists. I love lists, putting pen to paper and just putting down like, you can start with your hobbies. What do you like to do? What do you value? I had no idea what my values were. My values were your values. I'd go on one date, you tell me your values, like, yep, those are my values too. And it can't work that way. It can't work that way. You have to have a deepened sense of self before you invite anybody else in your life. Well, I'll speak for myself, for me anyways. And I started to write down some of the things that I needed in my life to feel good, to show up for another person. One of those things is exercise for me. Forget the weight. If I don't exercise for my mental health, I'm not going to show up the best I can in a relationship. I just know it because I don't even show up well for myself. I feel tired. I feel sluggish. And the moment I start exercising again, I'm just a better person in my relationships. My spiritual practice, meditation, reading spiritual material, it's something important for me. It's something that grounds me in the morning. When I don't do it, especially if someone else is around, it's like I wake up and the million thoughts are going through my mind and I'm buzzing around and, okay, what are we going to do today? And run out the door. And I'm just not my best self. So these are these type of things that I have to lay as these kind of non-negotiables for me and my self-identity to be able to actively participate as a good version of myself in a relationship. And then I think it came down to like, what am I actually looking for? And I think codependence, anybody who struggles with addiction, it's difficult. It's difficult for a codependent to say what they're looking for. I've seen so many people throw their values and non-negotiables out the window because somebody says they like them or they want to be in a relationship with them. Like big fundamental values, big non-negotiables out the window. It's like, okay, let's do this. You know, out of 10 things, they'd settle for like a 2 on 10. And it's like a 2 on 10 is never going to work. There needs to be more than that. So getting down on paper some of the things that I'm not okay with, you know? Because even if I say I'm okay for the first 6 to 8 weeks, I mean, that honeymoon phase, however long it's going to last, is going to come crashing down. And then I'm going to have to be okay with how you live your life and how I live my life. And there's always going to be differences for sure. And I think that's what can complement people. But the communication style, your values, where you're going in life, what you want, where you want to travel, how you think about money, do you drink, do you smoke, do you do drugs, all of these things, like, you know, and probably sound like very normal things to a normal, secure, healthy, attached person. They're probably like, yeah, just duh. We know this. But to any codependent, including myself, that I've ever worked with, this is real work that has to be done. Because when you don't have a sense of self, you'll take anybody else's sense of self and you'll actually merge the two together till it becomes this very, very, very sick intertwined. And then like your moods start becoming based on how the other person's feeling. If the other person's in a bad mood, you'll be in a bad mood. If the other person's happy, you'll be happy. If the other person texts you, okay, you're okay now. If the other person ignores you, you're in a fucking cycle for 3 days obsessing about this person. It's not sustainable. We cannot continue a relationship. We cannot survive that way. I just thought of my best friend too. Again, I remember one day her husband was in a bad mood. I'm like, are you okay? Like, I think he's in a bad mood. And she's like, yeah, so like, she was like, just let him deal with it. It was a complete separation. Whereas with me, I can still fall into that trap today, but especially in the past, oh my God, if you were in a bad mood, I either had to fix it, solve it, talk about it, pick at it, dig it up, and I would annoy the other person and myself. It was really just like people are allowed to feel what they feel. They can be in whatever mood they want to be in. It doesn't always have to be about Jess. You know, it doesn't mean that I did something wrong or there's a problem in the relationship. Like I had to start to think like, Jess, you're allowed to be in a bad mood. When you're in a bad mood, it's not because of somebody else. And really learning how to separate those two is a very big deal. And I think also too, you know, when you put things on paper and you put an ideal on paper, it's really striving towards that. You know, it's like any other goal. And I mean, and then you open up the door to this whole online dating world and it's difficult. It's difficult. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of expectation. You know, it's like one coffee date and then like I have some girlfriends, like all of a sudden they're in a relationship and I'm just like, oh boy, oh boy. And I've fallen into the trap myself, you know, and I'm like, somebody would smile at me or say they liked me and I'd be like, hey, sign me up. And it's like, no, what are you signing up for? Like, what happened to being friends for a while? What happened to getting to know each other? You know, you got to spend time with somebody to know if you like them or not. And that's the tricky part about online dating. It's like a coffee, maybe a dinner date. And it's like, okay, let's do this. And it's hard sometimes. And another thing my best friend told me, she's like, stop putting all your eggs in one basket. Like, why can't you just date people? Like, go out for coffee with a bunch of different people. Like, it doesn't have to be one coffee and then you're married to this person. You know, you're allowed to date, you're allowed to explore, you're allowed to do these things and see if there's a connection, you know. I think at the end of the day, though, it's really if that connection is missing with self, it's very, very, from what I've seen and what I've experienced personally, it's very difficult to make a lasting connection with somebody else. when I was constantly bringing in my issues into relationships. A, it wasn't fair to my partners. And B, it's like, I either want them to solve my problems, and they couldn't solve those problems. People can't make you feel better about a lot of issues. No partner of mine is ever going to solve the fact that no matter what weight that I'm at, I always feel like it's not enough. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone else, because they can call you beautiful all they want. They can compliment you all they want. But if I feel that way about myself, there's no telling me otherwise. And that's going to constantly be this weight that I'm bringing. So that practice of self-acceptance, that practice of trust, that practice of being able to be honest and talk to your partner about how you're feeling, what insecurities are coming up, but then also doing your own work around it. Because if I expect other people to make me feel better, I'm going to fall very short. They're going to fall very short, because I've had it. I remember being in Toronto and getting down to a size God knows what. And my friends were like, "Are you okay? Like, are you okay?" I didn't even realize. I would still look in the mirror and I'd be like, "Oh, your frame's still big. Your shoulders are still big. Your rib cage is still big." It's like, what are you going to do about your rib cage size, Jess? Your rib cage is your rib cage. You're never going to be this 00 tiny petite girl. So start fucking liking who you are, because you're going to have big problems if you keep going forward like this. And it's such a shame. It's such a shame how many years had gone by, and now working with more people than ever on body image and codependency, like all the way up into their 50s, just beating the shit out of themselves. And it's like, no, 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 life is way too short. And I look at them like they're fucking fabulous. And I'm like, oh, I wish you could see how fabulous you were. And then I'm like, just take your own advice. You need to pour on that self-love, and it's a daily practice. This is not like a, one therapy appointment, one journaling, one podcast. This has been daily for me. Every day, especially at the end of the day, a very cool practice of like, how did you treat yourself today? How did you treat others today? Did you say something out of line today? Did you say something aggressive towards yourself today? And doing those little spot check inventories can really help, and not let, 6 months or a year, big pile of shit grow and feel totally overwhelmed and not know why you're upset, breaking it down into those smaller chunks. I feel like that was a really big rant about my personal turmoil relationships, but it's okay, because that's what I promised I was going to do here. I was going to tell you about, my life and how much insecurity followed me throughout my life. And I think when you feel that insecure about yourself, it clouds your judgment on everything else. It impacts everything else. How you're going to show up, how you're going to interview, how you're going to travel, how you're going to get into relationships. If I hate me, there's no way I can love you. So if this podcast can help someone, shave off 10 years of beating the shit out of themselves, then so be it. So be it, because there's a lot more going on than the size of my rib cage or the size of my shoulders. Nobody gives a shit. My friends never have, my partners never have. And if I ended up with somebody who did care about the size of my rib cage, then I shouldn't be with that person anyways, And maybe this is all just kind of part of the plan. Maybe this is all just things that you're supposed to realize in your 30s. I don't know. My mom says 50 to 60 were her best years. So I think I still have plenty of decades to look forward to. But if I'm leaving you with something today, is please develop that sense of self. Think about what you're good at. Think about the amazing things that you do have to offer instead of all the things that you don't. When you focus on the things that you don't have to offer, you're blocking yourself. You're blocking yourself from opportunities. You're blocking yourself off from anything energetic that could possibly be coming your way. If you're talking badly about yourself, you're going to somehow block that. So getting clear about who you are, celebrating who you are. And again, I love all of you listening to this podcast. You're amazing. I can't even believe how many people are listening to this now. I don't know if I would listen to myself, but You guys are wonderful. I'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone, for listening and supporting Living Out Loud. Be sure to tune in next week for another fun, juicy episode.